So the timing of this sermon could have been more relevant. We started the series fearless.
Yes.
And I love the name. I love the idea of it. And don't fear religion is your first sermon series. And I know that you couldn't anticipated what was happening in Israel.
No.
To start on Saturday before your sermon. So for people that don't understand kind of the history, I know that you and Larry know the history very well.
Yeah.
Larry's been there so many times.
Yep.
And so could you give us kind of the backstory? I mean, obviously, those of us grew up in Sunday school, we learned like the Palestinians and the Israelites were always at odds even back then.
That's right.
So this isn't something that's a new thing.
No.
I mean, we're talking thousands of years that these two
millennia.
Yeah.
Millennia.
So give us a little bit of a historical perspective on what is going on.
I'll give you. So when you look at the quick history lesson, when you look at what we call the three monotheistic religions, which they're typically called, so Judaism, Christianity, Islam. So those are the three monotheistic religions, but they're also called the Abrahamic religions because all three trace their origin to Father Abraham. And we sang about that in Sunday school. He had many sons, whatever. So Abraham is the central figure of those religions. Particularly for Judaism, which again, Jesus was Jewish, and of course, Christians follow Jesus. Islam follows Abraham as well. So again, Christianity is sort of an outlier when it comes to those because our main person is Christ. But what it begins, it's a very problematic and tumultuous story. And again, depending if you're Palestinian or Jewish, you're very biased as to the outcome of this story. So Abraham was old, and he was promised by God that he would be the father of many nations, right, of the Hebrews. So he tries to have a son, right, who would inherit this blessing. And Sarah was old, and so she didn't believe she could get pregnant. So she offers Abraham her servant girl, her handmaiden, Hagar, to which Abraham has sex with Hagar. And she conceives a son, and they name him Ishmael. Now that is where Palestinians and Muslims trace their lineage to Father Abraham, through the lineage of Ishmael, who is the firstborn son of Abraham. Now, the Jewish claim is that he is the illegitimate son of Abraham, not the promised son. So then Sarah gets jealous and forces Abraham essentially to kick Ishmael and Hagar out of their encampment. But the Bible's very clear that Abraham loved Ishmael and blessed Ishmael. And the Quran picks this up. So not many of our viewers probably have read the Quran. I've read the Quran many times. And the stories in the Quran talk about how Abraham came to visit Ishmael and blessed him. And of course, they settle in what is now, what we'd call the Middle East. But then Abraham goes back to Sarah. They have relations, and she conceives at an old age, and she gives birth to a son named Isaac, which the Jews claim is the promised blessed son of Abraham and Sarah. And so they trace their lineage back to Isaac. And of course, Abraham gives Isaac his blessing and so forth and so on. So that is where the trouble begins, is that you have Father Abraham, who has two sons, two firstborn sons.
Right.
A firstborn promised son, but then a firstborn natural son, right? And so this is where the wedge essentially begins as to who has rightful claim of the Abrahamic blessing, which includes these lands. And that has been thousands and thousands of years, 3,500 years or whatever it is.
Right.
But since then, there's obviously been political and economic struggle between these.
Sure. England had a hold, later on, and
absolutely,
to where it was
colonialism played a part
100%
in all of this as well.
Yeah.
But for a long time, there was no state of Israel prior to the 40s,
right.
And the United States came in and again displaced many Palestinians who were living on these lands for literally hundreds and hundreds of years, and said, it's time to go.
And I'm sure we would like to preface that any form of violence that rips our humanity,
that's right,
it's not acceptable.
Absolutely.
It's never justified.
Absolutely.
The Bible teaches us specifically to turn the other cheek.
Absolutely.
You know?
And I've been criticized as being like pro-Palestinian, and I'm pro-human.
Right.
I don't think terrorism works, nor do I think using the Bible as a legal document for, you know, the occupation of land works either. For me, the Bible is not the solution of the problem; it's the source of the problem. But I'm pro-human, so both sides have blood on their hands. Both sides do.
But that you separate Palestine from, because we've had conversations about this. You separate Palestine from the Hamas.
Yes,
the Hamas are a completely.
It's a different organization. And again, my Muslim friends don't want to be painted with that brush of Hamas or any sort of like terroristic jihad. And again, we hear the word jihad, immediately we think terrorist. That's not what that word means. In Arabic, the word jihad ultimately means the inner struggle, the struggle against self and ego, and Christians may call it sin, you know, the struggle against sin and the things that we want to do that go contrary to God's will or plan. Right. That's all jihad means. But many radical Muslims have taken that to make the struggle external against the enemies of Allah or whatever. Right. And of course, their focus is Israel, because of the displacement of peoples. Right. And then the way the United States is integrated into that is because, well, we give along the lines of somewhere between $12-15 million a day to Israel. Like we give no income to Gaza or to the West Bank where Palestinians live. Now some would say, well, we give to Iran, Iraq, and they support Hamas. Now that's true too. But the point is, dude, it's religion. You are seeing religion play out. Yeah.
In a horrifying way.
It's absolutely. And if as a Christian, as a person who follows Jesus, here's what I say to that. And this is very controversial. Jesus says, there is no Jew or Gentile. There is no man or woman in God's kingdom. When God looks at us, he sees children, his humanity. So you look at all the infighting we have about gender roles or transgenderism or whatever our gender identity is. Like Jesus says, there's no male or female. What do you do with that?
Right.
And as a Christian, that's what I say. There's no male or female. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. All I see is humanity. There is no Jew or Gentile. There is only the children of God. And that's why I believe religion seeks conformity. You have to abide by this. And this is why if I'm critical of some legislation that the Israeli government places, then I'm called anti-Semitic. Right. That's wrong. That's you can't blast me with that, dude. It used to be like, if you just study the history, the Gaza Strip has been called like an open-air prison by many. Yeah,
Larry made that same claim too last time they were there.
And you can't go in or out. Yeah, right. But yet there were work visas given to many Palestinians. Upwards of 100,000 were able to go into Israel to work, because Gaza in and of itself is occupied by Israeli military forces. That there's no import or export economy. Like, how do you survive? Right. Like, no country in the world has ever historically made it on its own accord. But yet that's exactly what's happening. But my concern, my compassion is for the children who did not choose to be born Jewish or Palestinian. Yeah. But they're brought up under religious systems that have a us versus them mentality, which was what the sermon was about. Yeah. And that creates not fear of anything other than the other, if that makes sense. Yeah. This is why Palestinians aren't allowed to go into Israel, because there is a fear of the other, which is perpetuated by religion. And even in Christianity, to bring it closer to home to where the sermon was originally situated, was this fear of, we can't allow people to come in with variations of different beliefs, because there is a fear that it will usurp whatever we're trying to teach or indoctrinate from the stage.
And I'm glad you pointed out too that it's not just religion is not just Christianity, the classic religions. Religion is anything that you're like part of a group that shares a common belief or goal.
That's right.
Right. And so even calling atheism a religion, agnosticism a religion,
That's right.
It's like, I'm a part of this group that believes this specific thing.
That's right.
And I do believe that to be true, and just like, and I think you did a great job at this, like pointing out, like, just like you don't want to be painted with the brush of the snake handlers or Westboro Baptist Church that is literally protesting dead soldiers.
That's right.
Funerals. You don't want to be painted. Those guys are Christians, but you don't want to be painted with that same brush.
That's right.
And obviously, to the more extreme example, your Muslim friends don't want to be painted.
That's right.
As the same brush as the Hamas.
That's right.
And so trying to navigate this world of gray when you just want so badly to be right and wrong is really, really difficult.
That's it.
And, there's clear things that we can see are right and wrong. But there's so much history between these two groups of people.
It's very complex, man. It's not as simple as saying, "Oh, I'm pro this and I'm against that."
Yeah.
It's I'm pro peace and I'm pro the humanization of all people.
Yeah.
You absolutely have people who are terrorists.
I was going to say, what do you do with people that are just
on that side?
Yeah.
You absolutely do. And that's a difficult question. I think you need to find those criminals and punish them accordingly. But what we see happening is the good having to suffer for the bad. And particularly if most people adhere to traditional Christian doctrinal teachings, then in your belief, because most of my Facebook feed is fed by many of those guys who believe more traditional Christian teaching. If that's your belief, the good have to suffer, then Jesus accomplished that already for you. Like the good has already suffered for the bad. So let's get this straight, that those Palestinians are just as human as the Jews on the other side.
Yeah.
And the Jews are just as human as the Palestinian terrorist who fired those rockets. And what has to happen is you have to get on your knees and pray like, God, intervene, because the same God who created you and I and people who are kind and loving and giving is the same God who dwells within every one of those people, both the innocent and the guilty.
Yeah.
And that's why I say Christianity is not about the acceptance of something; it's the awakening to something.
Yeah.
And fear of the other is what drives that sort of, I need to eradicate.
Yeah.
And it's a sad situation, man. That's what fear does when it's based in religious sort of dogmatic fundamentalism, man.
Yeah. I picked up my daughters from school yesterday, and I had to break the news to them that we weren't going to Israel because they've been looking forward to this trip. They've been reading the stories of the different places that we were going to visit.
Right.
And Leighton, from the minute I told her that we were doing baptism, she was like, I want to be baptized in the Jordan River. Like, she was looking forward to that. And I had to tell them, like, hey, we're not going. I'm sorry. And they were asking why, naturally, and I told them about the war. And they're like, another war? Like, this is, obviously they've been hearing about Russia and Ukraine now for a little while. Mm-hmm. And they asked me, they were like, first of all, they asked, like, are we safe? And I said, yes, baby, we're safe. We're very safe. We'll be all right. But they're like, who are we rooting for?
Yeah.
They asked me, they're like, who are we hoping wins? And I was like, nobody wins in war.
Yeah.
And I had to have that hard conversation with them that a lot of innocent civilians and people that don't have anything to do with this war are going to die. And they already have.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, man.
There's this saying, this guy, he gets to heaven, and he has this question for God. He's like, he has it in his mind. He's like, I'm going to ask God, why is there so much suffering in the world? But he stopped. He's like, I wanted to ask God why there's so much suffering in the world, but I was too afraid to ask because I thought he may ask me as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and it's like, we allow a lot of suffering. We cause a lot of suffering as humans. And when you look at something like this, to where it's like, we're talking about two different books.
Yeah.
That thousands and thousands and thousands of people are going to die over.
Yeah.
It's really rough, man.
Yeah, man.
It makes you hate religion.
Yeah.
It makes you hate it.
And what can you say other than, you know, you feel for the people, you know, for the innocent people on the Israeli side who, you know, whatever the number is now, 2,500, whatever. It's, that die. It's like children, people who are just going about their day, you know, and the, like you said, the root of it is these texts that were written with Bronze Age thinking.
Yeah.
And those texts have become idols. You know, they've become their own sort of gods in how we approach them. And the sad thing is, I don't see it changing. You know, and this sparks so much of the what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of the paranoia and the sort of capitulation of these beliefs of,
it's like 9/11, not as bad, but like
these beliefs of what we call in theology eschatology, like the end times,
right?
And that we're now.
That's what I was going to ask you as well, because I mean, as a someone who grew up in Assemblies of God, Assemblies of God, very charismatic, very Pentecostal, very big on end times, and I was starting to bring up some PTSD in my Facebook feed, because I'm like seeing a lot of my old church friends talking about end times, and you know, Jesus is coming back, and you know, I grew up with this massive fear as a child, like, am I going to get left behind? Yeah. You know, like, are we in the end times? They're supposed to be terrible. And I just remember as a child, my pastor is like, it's coming. The end times are coming, you know, and
Jesus is coming back.
Yeah. And it wasn't something that I was hoping for. It was something it
dreaded.
Scared the living hell out of me.
Yeah.
And so I remember a conversation with my dad one time. I'm like, Dad, you know, did they talk about end times when you were a kid? And he's like, oh yeah. Been talking about this for a long time.
Oh yeah.
So what are your kind of controversial hot takes? Because I know you and Larry share a similar.
Yeah, we both are on the same page theologically regarding that. I mean, these notions of what we call dispensational theology, like God is dispensating particular aspects of his characteristic, his attributes, whatever. That's that was 1901, 1902, a guy named C.I. Scofield. Like, there's a Scofield reference Bible that was even made because of him. Yeah. Like he invented that sort of notion and that belief, because he's trying, again, the worst thing Christianity has ever done is try to rationalize the mystery of what God is and what God has done. And when you try to employ sort of logical, sort of structured, prepositional, correspondent realities to the Bible, you miss the whole point of it. You miss the mythology, you miss the symbolism and the principality, like, of what God is trying to teach. And Richard Rohr writes about this. Brett did a class on it called it's the patterns that are always true. And that's what you look for when you read scripture. What are the patterns here that are true here? Not how do I keep this, how do I solve the problem of, well, this is no longer true, like eating shellfish or wearing two fibers woven together.
Right.
Those are no longer abominations, but how do I, and dude, you open a Pandora's box when you try to look at the scripture that way. And the same can be true for these very, very, like, sketchy texts that talk about being caught up in the air. And Scofield and his band of dispensationalists basically said, yeah, that's what's going to happen. The rapture, that God is going to take the church so that we don't have to go through this tribulation period from the book of Revelation. So here's my 2 cents. There's no rapture. Jesus is not coming in the clouds to remove the church from any time of tribulation, where people will try to kill themselves and they won't die. Like, no, dude, like that's physiologically, biologically, like empirically impossible. People will die if you try to kill yourself. You shoot yourself in the face with a shotgun, you're dead.
Right.
No matter what time it is. But the point is, when it talks about Jesus ascending, that word simply means he went higher than the rest. So he ascended the mountain. He just walked higher for acoustical purposes. The coming back of Jesus, again, is a very deeply symbolic gesture of Paul writing in Thessalonians of this grand sort of entrance of the mystery of the sky. The sky is the border between what heaven is and what earth is. And again, you misinterpret these verses of the mystery of the verse of what Paul is trying to say, and you try to literalize it like, no, there is a literal Jesus coming on a literal white horse with literal trumpets blowing.
Right.
Like, how does that even happen geographically? Like, where can he come to the earth where all would see him? Mm-hmm. It's impossible. Paul is making this sort of this what we call this apocalyptic type statement.
Yeah. Well, and you have to look at the audience that Paul is writing to here.
Absolutely. So, I mean, even most scholars, even biblical scholars, believe that Jesus' first followers thought he would return in the first century.
Right.
Like
to end their suffering.
To end the suffering.
Right.
And that's not the point. The point is not Jesus coming to save you through the clouds. The point is Jesus comes to save you from within.
Right.
It's the inside out, not from the outside in.
Right.
So again, man, I don't know how to emphatically state that other than there is no help coming from the clouds. There's only help coming from the ground, which is why your story is absolutely pertinent. Because ask God why there's so much suffering. He goes, I was going to ask you the same question.
Right.
What are you doing about it? What do you do? How are you helping?
Yeah.
What conversations are you bringing people into?
I know Larry likes to say, the book of Revelation, which a lot of the imagery of end times comes from. He likes to say it's a code book and we don't have the key.
Yeah.
A lot of the imagery is code for something.
Yeah.
And it almost didn't make it in the Bible. Like it almost didn't make it into the canon.
No.
They debated for that one for a while.
A long time. Yeah. By the skin of its teeth, literally. And as to was the Gospel of John.
Right.
But when you look at the symbolism of the book of Revelation, the beast with 10 horns and 10 crowns upon it, and people have tried over and over. That's Russia. Russia had the bear. The bear is the symbol of Russia.
Oh, I see that all the time.
Oh my God, dude! And then this is the symbol of China and the billion-man army. That's China. And but where's the United States in that? Like, oh, it's not there. That means the United States must crumble and must be destroyed. And like all of these assumptions and presuppositions that are made do more harm. Like I said, they create more fear of God than they do followers of Jesus. And Jesus says, love your enemy. Mm-hmm. He's not saying invite your enemy over for dinner if you don't want to, but he's saying love them.
Yeah.
Because I'm in them too. Mm-hmm. Pray for them. For what? What should I pray for? That they agree with me? It's not going to happen, bro. It's just not going to happen. Pray that they awaken to the fact that the same God that lives in them is in you.
Right. And
that you can agree to disagree and still live in freaking peace, dude. Right. You still can live in peace.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories is, I am going to blank on his name. This is a black gentleman that made it his mission to befriend as many Ku Klux Klan members as he possibly could. And he's been doing this for a long time. Yeah. And he wasn't fighting them. He wasn't killing them. And he has, I don't know that you could say converted, but like pulled out hundreds of Ku Klux Klan members just by befriending them. And it's an amazing story of just like, I know the world isn't all roses and dandelions. I know that. Yeah. I know that there's a lot of really bad people. And to the people that are claiming like, when is, these are the end times, or there's so much suffering right now. Man, I would have thought that if there was a pinnacle of suffering within human history, how do you... Daryl Davis was his name. Thank you, Kyle. Daryl Davis is an amazing human, man. He's aspirational.
Yeah.
But for the end times, like if you're talking about coming and ending suffering, I was reading the amount of deaths per day for World War I and World War II. Tens of thousands of people were dying every single day.
Yeah.
If 1,000 people die today in one day from any sort of like major catastrophe, it's all over the news.
Imagine if 1,000 people died in Sarasota.
Exactly. Be everywhere. It'd be
in an isolated area, right?
World headline.
Yep.
And this was true for a lot of people for a long time during the World War I, World War II, when especially in World War II, when specifically the chosen people, the Jews, were being killed.
Yeah.
That would have been like a perfect time for God to come back and save his people, right?
Yeah.
And so it begs the question of like, if you're waiting for this external force to end the suffering, I think we're gonna be waiting for a long time.
That's right.
But if we can do our own, to the best of our own ability, to end suffering around us, and everybody catches on to that, that's a true awakening. And I think that's what Christ was talking about when he talks about heaven on earth.
Yeah.
It's like, this is peace,
That's it.
And if we can all kind of not look at the differences, but look at what we have in common, even down to the core that we are all God's children.
That's right.
Even if the other person doesn't believe it, just viewing them like that.
Yeah.
And I was listening to Rogan the other day, and he was saying, he's like, I try my best whenever I'm in, he takes it as extreme as serial killers. He's like, I look at serial killers and I try to picture them as babies. Mm-hmm. He's like, it really helps. He's like, because I'm a dad. He's like, and when I view people as babies, as children, it really helps me have a little bit more compassion for them.
It's funny you say that, dude, because I'm wrestling for this Sunday, because this Sunday is about how we shouldn't fear God. And I remember I've been to prison. Did prison ministry years ago, and I've been to prison not by being arrested. But I've been down death row 3 times, on death row 3 times, and had the chance to chat with some of these guys, obviously from a distance behind the bar. And I'm wrestling, dude. I get I'm getting chills thinking about it. And talking to these guys in that, very safe situation, and just hearing their voice. And people say they're master manipulators, whatever. I could pick up on that BS pretty quick when I feel I'm being manipulated or someone wants something from me. But there was one guy in particular that I'm thinking about sharing his story. Like, dude killed 3-4 people. He was on drugs and all these things. And to hear his story, and what changed him was not the incarceration. It was not the punishment. It was not the getting caught. It was a priest who just loved him. And still to this day, again, it's been 10 years or so since, I don't know if they've executed him yet or whatever. But it was just love. Love is what changed him, not the fear of being caught. Because, dude, we have prison. We have more people in prison in the United States than every other country combined by a lot. And so fear, like I said, is good for temporary behavioral change.
Sure.
But again, to follow Christ means I'm following a pattern, a principle of transformation, because that's long lasting. We live in a culture that wants temporary or fast food, microwave experiences and change. And that's why the come to the front, pray this prayer after me is so freaking powerful.
Right.
Because it's convenient, and we want that convenience.
Well, and even just that security, right?
That's it.
Right.
And that's why I love we don't do that here.
Yeah.
There's no, and I've been asked since I've been here a little over 2 years, I've been asked at least 5 or 6 times, when are you going to do an altar call for people to get saved? Mm-hmm. And it's a very hard conversation. It's
yeah.
a hard conversation when you've been sort of inundated and indoctrinated to believe like that's what it takes, is this immediate. No, dude, it's hard. It's hard. Like, do you think these terrorists of Hamas are going to change like that overnight? Like, oh man, I was wrong. I was wrong. No, it takes a long process to show truth.
Yeah.
And that's why the word truth, Jesus never uses the word truth as veritas, like veracity. I prove it. 2 + 2 is 4. His idea of truth is aletheia, true thing. It is a ongoing, continual, perpetual process that will happen until the day you cease to exist. And so
I think that's the hard part about what you're saying. And I think that's the hard part about Christ's message because it goes against every human instinct.
That's right. That's right.
So when people say like, oh, Christianity is so easy, it's not.
No.
It's not. And we get called all the time, like, watered down, watered down, watered down. And I argue so hard that what we are saying is more difficult. And because the reality of the situation, whether you agree with it or not, and this goes against every human instinct that I have, is that we're supposed to look at those Hamas and say the same thing that Christ said to the people that nailed him to the cross.
Yep.
Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they do.
Yep.
It reminds me of a story. This mother, they caught the killer of her son. He just straight up murdered her son. Mm-hmm. And he was facing sentencing. He was tried and convicted. And she stood up there and she said, I forgive you.
Yeah. I showed a video like that in one of my teachings.
Yeah. I think that was the one. Yeah.
And she goes, I don't want to hurt you.
Yeah.
I want to hug you.
I want to hug you.
I want to hug you.
Yeah. And I'm just like, that. Could you do that?
Jesus.
Could I do that?
Not on my own.
No.
I would need some external power.
And so it's like, yes, we have the ideal of what we're looking for.
That's right.
You know, and it's just like, as difficult as that is to imagine, that's the most unimaginable pain as a parent, to lose your child to somebody else. Mm-hmm. And she was able to forgive. And that's what we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, man.
And I know it's hard.
Yeah.
And we're going to fail. Like, I'm a very, like, you wrong me, even worse, you wrong a friend or a family member. Oh.
So I'll end with this. Do you know why forgiveness is so hard? Mm-mm. Like, true forgiveness. Mm-mm. I'm not talking about the face value. Like, yeah, dude, I forgive you. And you still talk crap about that person. It's not forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Forgiveness says, you no longer owe me that debt. Mm-hmm. I pay it. I eat it.
Yeah.
I swallow it. I digest it. In that long process, that means I incur the debt that you owe. And that's where I think a lot of like the doctrinal stuff about the atonement came from.
Yeah.
But yet Jesus says, no, now you have to do it. Now you have to do it. And you're right. Like, I say this all the time. To be Christian means to be like Christ. And that dude died to save the same dudes who nailed him to that cross. And by save, I don't mean save from a place. The word save for me is transform.
Right.
To transform. And he still saw potential of transformation in those same Roman soldiers who nailed him, because he said, they don't know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And one day maybe we'll find out. Like, maybe they went home and were like, what do we do?
Right.
And their heart completely changed. And that's an amazing story. Like, mm-hmm. They just don't know what they're doing. Yeah. They have insufficient information. And I think the us versus them, oh, I'm pro this, I'm pro that. It's because I'm not conflicted. I'm just informed. Mm-hmm. And yes, I am praying for Israel, but I'm also praying for Palestine. Yeah. Because whether they believe it or know it or accept it or not, we are all brothers and sisters in God, man. And at some point, we will hopefully awaken to that truth. Yeah. And It doesn't erase the complexity of what's happened or the blood that's on both hands. But hopefully what it does is soften the blow so they can actually begin communication. So
yeah,
we'll see.
I appreciate your time.
Yeah, man.
And I'm excited for this next weekend. So fear less.
You don't have to fear God, man.
Fear God.
Fear God's our Father.
Yeah.
God's our mother.
Yeah.
And that'll be, I guess, the controversy there is we always, just because of our language, we call God him and he. But there are times I need my mom too, bro.
Yeah.
There are times I definitely need my mom, and God has those attributes as well. So we'll get into that.
Amazing. Well, thank you for being on the One More Thing, Troy.
You got it, man. Thanks.
Appreciate you.